In November of 2024, HBO Max premiered the new Dune Prophecy TV miniseries intended to tie in with the Villeneuve Dune movie released the same year. Now, I would consider myself somewhat of a new fan to the Dune series, and definitely a fan of Villeneuve's work on that series. I really enjoyed what he had to offer, and I was excited, if not a bit wary, of the Dune Prophecy series, given that it's intended to be talking about the rise to power of the Bene Gesserit, a faction of powerful psychic witches in the Dune setting. And, it's modern Hollywood, but I wanted to give it a fair shake. Now, having seen the release of their first episode, episode 1, I gotta say, things are not looking good. Overall, the way I'm going to format this video, I'm going to give you my general thoughts and my big issues, as well as slap a nice, blank out of 10 number rating, and kind of why I feel that way. So, main things with the show. First of all, very obvious and frequent usage of a volume screen. It's not a big deal. I understand you're working on a TV project. Sometimes you gotta cut corners and use volume screens. It's okay. It's just, it was very apparent, and I hope that that's something they improve on as the show goes on. Another thing, and this is a huge writing criticism, they are abusing their ability to do time skips. The whole show is just time skip, time skip, time skip. Constant time skips. And it's not even like, notable time skips where they're skipping multiple years or months or whatever. They're usually just skipping around and they don't tell you how long it's actually been. First we're seeing people talk here, now we're seeing people talk here, now we're seeing people talk here. And there is an implied change of time going on, but we as an audience have no sense of it. In addition to that, it's an hour-long episode, but it contains a massive glut of these sweeping, lingering shots that are very obviously attempting to be Villeneuve's movie. You guys aren't artists, okay? You're hacks. Stop wasting my time. Another thing is they very clearly do not want you to forget that they are in the same universe as, the Dune movies. Everything from casting to shooting style to soundtrack work, they're trying to be the movies, which makes sense for, something that's meant to tie in with those movies. But with the way they've done it, with the quality of actors, writers, and soundtrack that they provided, it more so comes off as a cheap ripoff of the IP that they have the rights to. Something I do really appreciate with the show is it's set around the time of the Butlerian Jihad in the setting, which is, as far as you need to know outside of spoilers, it's a big formative war. Specifically, the show takes place, I think, about 113, or maybe it's 113 years after the Butlerian Jihad. And so to these people, they would view it like World War I or World War II. And when the show does take the opportunity to display that, you really do get that sense, and I think they do a good job of that. Another one, they absolutely abuse, dialogue. Just constantly. It feels like every discussion between two characters is just them talking about something they both know for the audience's benefit. There's a better way to do it. Literally just shoehorn in an outsider for the audience to be able to relate to, so that everybody can explain all this shit to them. It's not hard. Or just use narrations. If you need to do it clunkily, if you need to be direct about it, just do a voiceover, just do a narration. Don't bother with this fucking bullshit. Everybody notices it, it's not sneaky, and it makes your show look cheap. Also, they are more than happy to waste your time with shitty Marvel tier banter. It's really annoying. There are constantly these rooms full of all these background characters, but nobody ever talks. For a show that is so obviously trying to emulate Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, they are not maintaining the scope where, House of the Dragon is not putting its extras into a setting where it makes sense. A notable example is there's like 4 or 5 girls that are like our main cast kind of thing, that are in basically a classroom setting, but they're surrounded by 15 to 20 extras that are also in that class, and the teacher keeps asking questions and only these 5 girls answer. It's not treated as notable, or like all the other classmates are dropping the ball or don't know the answer or anything like that. It's just like, yeah, of course they're answering because they have speaking lines. It's just, once again, it's cheap. Another thing, some of the worst sword fighting I've ever seen. They are obviously trying to aim for the swords. It's just really annoying. I won't get too much into it. They do Game of Thrones bullshit in a universe where Game of Thrones bullshit would not fly. Time skip and location skips. Again, can't harp on it enough. One of my big things is everyone talks a lot but says very little. It's flowery, grandiose dialogue that accomplishes nothing. In a lot of ways, this show is just Dune's version of Rings of Power, where they're just trying to rip off in the most cynical way possible the things that made the movies successful, with none of the care or quality that actually made them successful. People don't treat important events with the proper amount of grandiosity that they should. So, overall, my general thoughts about the show, I gotta say it's a 4 out of 10, and it is a low 4 out of 10 on that scale. The show is not very good, and the more you learn about it, the harder it gets to watch. I have a very good friend who I actually watched the show with, who is very familiar with the Dune setting and the Bene Gesserit, like obsessed with the Bene Gesserit. And I can tell you for a fact, she was massively let down with the show. And on a rewatch after brushing up on some of the Bene Gesserit lore myself, and, period lore from this point in time in the book series, I was let down as well. It made the show a harder watch. The show is obviously trying to court normies, but it's not accessible enough for normies, and it's not in-depth enough for fans. So I don't really think it's going to appeal to anybody. Just overall feels like a bad show. Would not recommend paying to watch it. In conclusion, and to sum up, Dune Prophecy comes from a setting and period in that setting with very rich storytelling potential, and it's held up by 3 or 4 experienced actors in its cast. Shots of the Imperial capital, the costumes in the palace, they all fit right in with what we would expect from a high society of a galactic imperium. Unfortunately, it's held back by the inexperienced amateurs plaguing every corner of the production of this show. It is glaringly apparent that the show writers and producers wanted to work on a Game of Thrones project and are doing everything they possibly can to ram the square peg of Dune into the circle hole of Game of Thrones. The show's cast is as broad as Season 5 of Game of Thrones, and they are determined to give every blessed one of them a 2-sentence introduction before the end of the pilot's hour and 6-minute runtime. This, mixed with the fact that every writer's credits exactly match their producing credits on IMDb, means that every other dialogue interaction begins with the mark of the beast, as you know. To compound their already myriad handicaps, they also decided to abuse the ability to change time and location of audience perception, making it impossible to tell the actual passage of time. All this together turns a pilot episode into an hour-long montage in a crude mockery of the Game of Thrones formula they are so desperate to emulate. When they're not trying to copy Game of Thrones, the writers, producers, and showrunners are instead trying to copy the recent Dune movies in the most shallow and cynical ways possible. Our all-star cast sports Temu versions of Zendaya, Paul Atreides, and Duncan Idaho, just to name the most obvious examples. And when they're not ripping off the Villeneuve's casting, they're making cheap photocopies of his directing style with long, sweeping shots that give away their cynical purpose in their purposelessness. I'm relatively certain that if I trimmed every dragging shot to 5 seconds or less, it would cut the overall runtime to below 50 minutes. Overall, Dune Prophecy has shit themselves during their first impression, and I'm not sure they can ever get that back. It's obvious that they know very little about the setting they're playing in and have little to no respect for it either. They often come off more than a little embarrassed, even, clearly ashamed to be working on the project, and bearing the arrogant attitude that they are raising it above its potential, in much the same way Paramount's writers did with Halo. While I anticipate that the show will only progressively decline from here, I hope that it gets better and can live up to the examples set both by the original books written by Frank and Brian Herbert and the 2020 movies.